Hello, my name's Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. It's Thursday, October 30th, 2025. Today is day 755, and this is the weekly briefing. I'm recording this from Rome after meetings this week on interfaith engagement with the Vatican around the 60th anniversary of Nostra Aetate. I wanted to start by responding to some questions that were asked last week during the weekly update. One of the participants in the live update asked, will areas under Israeli control allow for the Abu Shabaab gangs, militia, clan to continue operating there? In terms of a response, it seems the Israeli Defense Forces have sometimes defended its ally clan militias. This includes, at times, Abu Shabaab, when they're close enough that the IDF fire can be passed off as targeting militants approaching the yellow line. Inside the yellow line, the IDF attacks Hamas fighters whenever they are seen, whether fighting the clans or the militia or otherwise. So yes, Israel's clan militia allies continue operating in the Israeli zone, the yellow, beyond the yellow line. The problem for the militias is that most of them, and even more of their families, live in the cities where almost by definition they're outside of the Israeli zone. The exception to that would be Rafah. Another question that was asked is, are there evacuations from Gaza to the West Bank? There have been some medical evacuations, 50 or so. Third-party countries often navigate those. Most often, people leave Gaza and then depart to either Egypt or Jordan via, they might go through the West Bank to be able to travel. But evacuations from Gaza actually cover a variety of things. There are occasional medical evacuations, much less than are what are actually necessary. Publicized also, like the American evacuated recently, but there also are quiet evacuations. There have been evacuations out of not Ashdod, but some departure airport in the south of Israel, not down by the Red Sea, but north of the Gaza Strip. Gazans have also been crossing at Israel's request for intel or political consultations, and some, I'm sure, end up in the West Bank, as it's easier for Israelis to hide Palestinians from Gaza in the West Bank than in Israel, but there's a very, very tiny number that would fall into that category. Now, I wanted to move into the weekly summary of this past week. The big news is, while technically the ceasefire holds, the reality on the ground doesn't look all that different than the way that it did in the days prior to the 20-point agreement around the Trump plan. But there is hope. We hold on to hope even when we can't see it. But the big news is that bombing resumed in Gaza over the weekend, and following Tuesday into Wednesday, there were Israeli airstrikes that renewed. There were also clashes between Palestinian militants and the Israeli army on Tuesday. The Netanyahu government said that the bombing was in response to an attack on Israeli forces that happened in Rafah, but Hamas said that they had no relation to that specific incident. Israeli airstrikes killed 104 people in Gaza overnight, including 46 children. That was 48 hours ago. In response to the airstrikes, Hamas said that they would delay handing over bodies of another hostage, just one. Israel's military said on Wednesday that the ceasefire in Gaza was resumed after the airstrikes. So it kind of was like pause on the ceasefire, airstrikes, 104 people were killed, and then the ceasefire began. Now, to me, from a lay perspective in regard to military, that does not seem like a ceasefire, but it's still being called that. Hamas denied any involvement in that attack on Israeli forces. They insisted that they were working in good faith. Netanyahu's office said that Donald Trump had been informed before the bombing began. An Israeli reservist was killed this past week. He was a master sergeant, Yonah Ephraim Feldbaum. He was killed in the south of Gaza, 37 years old, in a combat engineering division. He's from a West Bank settlement. It's unclear to me if that was the specific incident where there was the attack in Rafah or not. But even prior to the bombing resuming over the week, this last couple of days, over the weekend, Israel's military said on Saturday that Israeli forces were carrying out a targeted strike on the members of the Islamic Jihad. This was in central Gaza. Islamic Jihad said in the statement that they had a planned attack that the Israeli Defense Forces' claim of their planned attack was just mere fallacious allegations. Local medics said 4 people were wounded in a drone strike by Israel. There were no immediate reports of death at that time. On Monday, at least 1 person in Gaza was killed by an Israeli drone strike attack in Abasan al-Kabira. This is near Khan Yunis. Monday, it was also reported that the IDF killed 2 Palestinians and wounded 3 others in a different strike on Khan Yunis. And at the same time, the Ministry of Health in Gaza said that 8 Palestinians were killed in that 24-hour period of time. 13 additional ones were hospitalized for injuries. The Israeli government approved Red Cross teams to operate beyond the IDF's yellow line in order to help locate bodies of hostages. And the Israeli army has been dumping construction waste and rubble inside of Gaza. This includes debris from IDF bases and infrastructure projects near the border. In terms of the specifics of the ceasefire agreement, last week, Hamas engaged in subterfuge. They had a body that they buried that was of an Israeli hostage. They didn't dig it up until they were ready to turn it over to the Red Cross, trying to make it look like, they were recovering this body from the ground. This was all captured on a U.S. drone video. The Red Cross issued a statement criticizing Hamas for staging the recovery of hostage remains. They said it's unacceptable to stage a fake recovery when so much depends on the implementation of the agreement. Now, 195 Palestinian bodies were returned to Gaza by Israeli authorities. This is a part of the 1 to 15 exchange. These are for the bodies of 13 Israeli hostages over the last 11 days. There was a forensic team at Gaza's Nasser hospital that said it's working with almost no resources to identify who the bodies are, but they said many have signs of mistreatment and torture. They said that what's happening in Gaza is an international forensic emergency. Based on the images, there's an imperative for complete medical autopsies. U.S. Secretary of State Rubio said essentially that Israel has the right to defend itself about the resumption of bombing. On Monday, he said that the U.S. does not view Israel's bombing of Gaza as a violation of the ceasefire. He said Israel has the right to self-defense and they have the right to engage if there's an imminent threat. On Monday, Hamas said that it would hand over an additional deceased Israeli hostage, but the Israeli Broadcasting Authority said the remains that were returned were not those of a hostage. That forensic tests showed the remains belonged to Ofer Tzafati, whose body had been recovered by Israeli forces in late 2023, and it was not one of the 13 deceased hostages. Netanyahu's office accused Hamas of clear violations and said that they would discuss steps in response. Now, Hamas said the group will enter into new areas of Gaza in order to try to find the additional remaining hostages. The number was at 13 as of the last day or so. And President Trump said the ceasefire is not at risk, despite the resumptions of strikes on Gaza. He said, as I understand it, Hamas took out an Israeli soldiers. The Israelis hit back as they should. That's what happens. If Hamas does not behave, they will be terminated. So said President Trump. The U.S. military is operating surveillance drones over the Gaza Strip to ensure that Israel and Hamas are adhering to the ceasefire agreement, at least according to U.S. standards. Egypt sent a team of experts to Gaza this week to also help to extradite bodies of deceased hostages. A spokesperson from Netanyahu's office said that they approved a purely technical team that is not connected with the Egyptian army. Israel's Defense Minister Katz said 60% of Hamas's, quote, terror tunnels, end quote, still remain. And on Friday, it was reported that the IDF had carried out a targeted strike in the central Gaza Strip on a terrorist from the Islamic Jihad, who they said planned to attack Israeli soldiers. 19 Palestinians were killed and 7 wounded in the last 48 hours, according to the health ministry. 4 of the dead were killed by Israeli army fire. Reports indicate it will take 20 to 30 years to clear the surface of Gaza of unexploded ordnances. This is incredibly dangerous for children and anyone in Gaza. If they're looking at full clearance, it will never happen. It's subterranean. They will be finding ordnances for generations to come. So said an explosive ordnance disposal expert. More than 53 deaths have been caused by lethal remnants since October 2023, which is thought to be a huge underestimate by many aid groups. I wanted to talk for a minute about the International Stabilization Force in Gaza. This is the next major step in terms of allowing the rebuilding of the Gaza Strip. President Trump met with Qatar's Emir and Prime Minister on Air Force One at a refueling stop in Qatar. And they said that the Gaza Stabilization Force should be ready soon. Qatar will send peacekeeping troops if needed. But nonetheless, at least in terms of what's been publicly reported, there's been no major progress. Netanyahu said this week, we've made it clear regarding the international forces that Israel will determine who is acceptable. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said late last week that the international force would be made up of countries that Israel's comfortable with. Netanyahu said Israel's an independent state, will decide. And that is specifically in response to the question of whether or not Turkish soldiers would be a part of the policekeeping force. This is significant. Turkey was one of the main actors that helped negotiate the deal in Sharm el-Sheikh, and there was a big question about whether or not they would be approved to send in troops. The stabilization force will be roughly 5,000 people strong to be set up in Gaza, but Israel essentially said no to Turkey. In addition, the state prosecutor's office in Israel filed an indictment against 3 Turkish citizens for weapons smuggling. This was related to an Iranian arms dealer. According to the plan, guns were supposed to reach Israel via the Jordanian border, but after a dispute, the deal was canceled. The Attorney General's office said in September that 2 of the defendants were captured in a kibbutz near the border with Jordan after they crossed into Israel. Jordan's King Abdullah II told BBC Panorama that Arab countries would join the U.S. proposed international force, but only if the mission is peacekeeping rather than law enforcement. This contradicts some of the things we've been hearing about the International Stabilization Force acting as a policing device because of the lack of other governance. Israel's government told the High Court of Justice it will re-examine the policy of whether or not to allow foreign journalists to be able to enter the Gaza Strip. They will update their policy in the next 30 days. And one of the released hostages, Bar Cooperstein, said his captors used the National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir's remarks and treatment of Palestinian prisoners as justification to beat and torture Israeli hostages in Gaza. Factions in Gaza have agreed to governance by technocrats. The main Palestinian factions said that they have agreed to an independent committee of technocrats to take over the running of Gaza after Hamas, but they need clear guarantees from mediators that the war has effectively ended. An update about humanitarian assistance. The bottom line is it is not enough. It is woefully inadequate. Relief workers have said that hundreds of trucks enter Gaza daily, but most are goods that have to be purchased. They're commercial goods, which is deeply problematic. Most Gazans can't afford them. Also, why should companies be profiting over such a devastating travesty? Sunday, UNRWA said that Israel continues to block its international staff, UNRWA said Israel continues to block its international staff and humanitarian aid from entering Gaza. 12,000 of its local staff are pushing ahead with providing healthcare, psychosocial support, and education. Humanitarian assistance is at terribly low levels, so said the World Health Organization. This was a week ago. They said there's little improvement in the amount of aid going into Gaza. The situation still remains catastrophic because what is entering is not enough. Also, the World Health Organization helped evacuate 41 critical patients and 145 companions out of Gaza. There are 15,000 more patients who are waiting to be medically evacuated. Late last week, at no point since the ceasefire came into effect have 600 UN aid trucks entered Gaza on any one day. The agreement calls for 600 trucks a day. That has not happened once in the last 3+ weeks. On Friday of last week, the World Health Organization's Director General said the amount of aid is only a fraction of what is needed, that more effort is desperately needed as 600,000 people still face severe levels of food insecurity. There's been no dent in hunger simply because there's not enough food. Moving on to settler extremism in the West Bank. It's been really horrific this past week. Settlers set cars to fire in the West Bank village of Atara near Ramallah. That was Tuesday night. A rabbi in the West Bank who's connected with the far-right Hilltop Youth Movement was arrested. He was kept under allegations, interrogated, and then released. Tuesday, Israeli forces killed 3 alleged Palestinian militants in the West Bank. Hamas said 2 of the men were members and confirmed all 3 had died in clashes with Israeli forces. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas announced on Sunday that Vice President Hussein al-Sheikh would temporarily assume leadership of the Palestinian Authority if Abbas is to step down or to die. Then 90 days later, there would be elections to pick a new leader. Israeli settlers set fire on cars near the village of Al-Mughayir in the central West Bank, and over 20 masked settlers attacked Palestinians and human rights activists in the Bedouin community of Mukhmas, southeast of Ramallah in the West Bank. After President Trump said he doesn't believe there to be a clear Palestinian Authority leader, he was questioned on whether or not he might negotiate the release of Marwan Barghouti. Mr. Barghouti is the prominent Fatah leader who was arrested in 2002. He was sentenced to 5 life terms plus 40 years for allegedly directing deadly attacks. This was during the Second Intifada. He's a figure that many believe could unite Palestinian factions. And could be potential to be elected as president. He supports the 2-state solution. Trump stated that he would make a decision shortly, and he does not believe Mahmoud Abbas to be a strong candidate to lead the Palestinians post the Gaza war. This came as Marwan Barghouti's wife appealed to President Trump to intervene on her husband's behalf. In a letter, she requested Trump's intervention. You'll recall that I'd given an update about Marwan Barghouti having been assaulted and been beaten unconscious by 8 guards in mid-September as he was being transferred between the Gano and Megiddo prisons. On Friday, dozens of Israeli settlers attacked Palestinian olive pickers. It is olive harvest season, and we've been getting reports from all over the occupied West Bank that Palestinians in many, many parts are unable to harvest their olives because of settler attacks. This happened in Termes Aya specifically, among many other locations. The Palestinian Wall and Settlement Resistance Commission says 158 attacks have happened in the last 2 weeks in the middle of the olive picking season. 18-year-old Palestinian Mohammed Ahmed Abu Hanin died of wounds this week sustained by an Israeli raid near the Oscar camp in Nablus. The Israeli army said 44 Palestinians in the occupied West Bank have been arrested over the past week. In Israel, a criminal probe has been launched into the leak of the video that showed the alleged abuse of a detainee from Gaza at the notorious Shteiman military facility. The IDF's top legal advisor also was placed on leave, pending further clarifications of details on the matter. An additional 54 unidentified Palestinians' bodies were returned last week by Israel. Forensic doctors have been having trouble identifying at least 2/3 of the body. Dr. Ahmed Deir, a senior forensic specialist at the Nasser Hospital, said that many of the bodies have signs of traumatic injuries. After numerous accusations of abuse towards Palestinian prisoners and detainees who are alive in Israel, Israeli Defense Minister Katz renewed a ban on the Red Cross, saying that they are not allowed to visit the thousands of Palestinian prisoners being held under Israeli detention under the law on the imprisonment of unlawful combatants. This was ahead of a high court petition that will be hearing this matter. Bringing back slain hostages will save lives, so said tens of thousands of people who rallied in Israel over the weekend, calling for the return of those remaining 13 bodies. Hundreds of Israelis also protested in front of the 2 prisons in Israel, where 4 different hostage deal activists are being detained. This is on charges of arson near Prime Minister Netanyahu's residence in September. The Prime Minister's office in Israel also reported that Netanyahu and Rubio committed to advancing the return of the remaining hostages, to disarming Hamas and demilitarizing Gaza. Regarding annexation of the occupied West Bank, late last week, I'm sure you recall, there was a bill that was applied to the sovereignty of the State of Israel, saying that the occupied West Bank should be under the sovereign State of Israel. It won preliminary approval in Israel's parliament late last week. Netanyahu's Likud party did not support the legislation, so it was passed by a vote of only 25 to 24 out of 120 lawmakers. This was the first of 4 votes. It's a question of whether or not it will move forward, but it was so significant because Marco Rubio was visiting Israel. He said that the U.S. is not supportive of the bill right now. He said we think it's potentially threatening to the peace process. A lot's been happening in Lebanon this past week. The IDF said this weekend they eliminated a Hezbollah commander in the south of Lebanon, Mohammed Akram Arabia, a commander in the Radwan Special Forces. The IDF said that he advanced the reestablishment of Hezbollah's combat capabilities. The IDF later announced that the Israeli strike in South Lebanon on October 14th killed a terrorist who transferred weapons to grow the organization's military capabilities. On Sunday, Israeli strikes in the south of Lebanon killed 3 people. Israel said that they were targeting Hezbollah members. Lebanon's army also is experiencing an explosive shortage. They've been using their resources to blow up Hezbollah arms caches as per the ceasefire deal between Lebanon and Israel. One source said the army is now sealing off sites instead of destroying them. They're waiting U.S. deliveries for explosive charges. Hezbollah also claimed it has the right to retain arms after the Lebanese government approved plans to disarm them last month. UNIFIL, the UN agency, shot down an Israeli military drone. This is significant. On Sunday, the IDF said the drone was a routine mission. Egypt's ambassador to Lebanon met with the Lebanese president, Joseph Aoun, ahead of an Egyptian intelligence visit this past week. And a week ago, Israeli airstrikes killed 4 people in both the east and the south of Lebanon. I'd mentioned that there's almost a death every day or a few days in the south of Lebanon, and this week that number was much higher. Amnesty International said yesterday that a U.S. airstrike in April killed over 60 detained African migrants in the Houthi prison in Yemen. They said it should be investigated as a possible war crime. They described the attack as indiscriminate with no clear military objective. Also, Iranian-backed Houthi rebels released 12 UN international employees this week. They allowed 3 others to move freely around the compound. More than 50 UN staffers are still detained by the Houthis. Some updates related to the United States. The U.S., as I mentioned previously, has begun monitoring ground activity in Gaza. They say they're taking responsibility for what's happening there. The White House also withdrew the name of Joel Rayburn as a nominee for the Assistant Secretary of State of Near Eastern Affairs. He was opposed by Senator Rand Paul, who questioned him specifically related to the number of U.S. troops on the ground in Syria in 2020. U.S. intelligence obtained in 2022 showed that the United Arab Emirates gave technology to China in order to upgrade its long-range missiles fired from fighter jets. 2 sources said that this technology was passed to Hawaii by G42, the UAE's AI group. G42 disputed the U.S. intelligence and said that they rejected the claims as false and defamatory. On Truth Social, Trump said that we are currently in the midst of a very strong peace in the Middle East. He said it could be everlasting as he urged Hamas to return hostages' bodies. I wanted to close with just some Christian updates. In Iran, Iranian Christians are pleased that Mina Kajavi, 61 years old, was released from Evin prison on the 20th of October. She had completed a 2-year prison sentence for leading a house church. And as I shared yesterday and today, I'm still in Rome for meetings around Nostra Aetate with the Vatican and other Christian and religious leaders from around the world. We've been talking about Nostra Aetate and praying for peace and for interfaith harmony. I had the privilege of hearing His Holiness Pope Leo's address on the event of Nostra Aetate. I'd encourage you to read it. While much of the work is being done behind the scenes, His Holiness Pope Leo's statement in response to the 20th anniversary of the historic Vatican interfaith document is important and should be explored. He said, in some of his remarks, he said, hope and pilgrimage are realities common to our religious traditions. This is the journey that Nostra Aetate invites us to continue, to walk together in hope. Then when we do so, something beautiful happens. Hearts open, bridges are built, new paths appear where none seems possible. This is not the work of one religion or one nation or one generation. It is the sacred task for all humanity, to keep hope alive, to keep dialogue alive, to keep love alive in the heart of the world. My dear brothers and sisters, at this crucial moment in history, we're entrusted with a great mission to reawaken in all men and women their sense of humanity and of the sacred. This, my friends, is precisely why we have come together in this place, bearing great responsibility as religious leaders to bring hope to humanity that is often tempted by despair. Let us remember that prayer, has the power to transform hearts, our words, our actions, and our world. It renews us from within, rekindling in us a spirit of hope and love. He then closed the service with a silent prayer. And I very much appreciated his words. Might God go before us, might violence be brought to an end, and might peace come quickly. In the name of Christ, amen.